Good evening. I am Mrs. Dave the lawyer. Happy Sunday. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Tonight we are streaming an Energy and Commerce House hearing. It's actually from July 22nd. There was tons of hearings that week that we can restream this week because August was a little bit late in the House, but there are some interesting hearings in the Senate, luckily. But tonight's hearing is about preventing frauds and scams and what the Federal Trade Commission's role is in this. Again, it's the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee. So let's get this started. I haven't heard anything about this hearing. I haven't even seen any excerpts. So this will be new for me as well.
The committee will come to order. The chairman recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's legislative hearing.
Hi, Maddie.
We're here today to consider a dozen bills aimed at strengthening consumer protections and ensuring the FTC and the Consumer Product Safety Commission have the tools they need to address challenges in today's economy. For decades, the FTC has served as our nation's primary consumer protection agency. Since its creation in 1914, the FTC has worked to combat unfair and deceptive practices and promote competition without unduly burdening legitimate business activity. From the FTC Act itself to the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the more recent Take It Down Act, the FTC has been a driving force in consumer protection issues by keeping Americans safe in nearly every corner of our economy. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, or the CPSC, plays an equally important role by safeguarding the American public from hazardous consumer products through education, strong safety standards, and enforcement. As online marketplaces continue to grow and imported products enter the U.S. in record numbers, it is critical that the CPSC is fully equipped to fight the wave of unsafe Chinese products flooding the American market. Today, we will examine 12 bills that would strengthen these agencies' ability to protect consumers. Several bills, including the PAC Act and the Recycled Materials Attribution Act, will improve transparency by addressing misleading recyclability claims while allowing for new innovations to improve recycling rates and assist job creators. Others, such as the Terms Act, would impose new transparency obligations on online platforms. We will also consider legislation such as the Nitrous Oxide Safety Act and Stop the Fraud Act, which seeks to address unsafe products and strengthen enforcement against foreign companies that violate our consumer protection laws. Together, these proposals represent Congress's continued effort to keep the FTC and the CPSC equipped to protect American consumers. Thank you, and I look forward to listening to the witnesses. So I want to welcome the witnesses, and now I'll yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Ms. Schakowsky, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate. Am I on? Can you hear? I appreciate this opportunity, but I want to tell you that for how many years?
For over a century.
For over a century right now, the Federal Trade Commission has protected consumers.
Ooh, this lady's having a hard time reading her script.
Move forward. But right now, what we're finding is Trump has actually weakened the ability of consumers to get the best of all they need right now. And so I want to I wanted to yield at this point to Representative Trahan to talk about what we really need to do.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Schakowsky. And I also want to thank the chairman. Today, I'm so glad to see H.R. 3209, the Bipartisan App Store Freedom Act, on today's agenda. And I'm grateful to my co-lead, Congresswoman Kat Kamak, for her tireless work on this bipartisan legislation. Smartphones are the front door to modern life, but Apple and Google control that door. Together, their operating systems power more than 99% of United States smartphones. Apple controls all native iOS app distribution in this country, while Google controls roughly 90% of Android app distribution. That's not a competitive market. It's a duopoly. Apple and Google can force developers into their payment systems, charge commissions of up to 30%, block customers from hearing about lower prices, and give their own apps an edge. That means consumers pay more for less choice and less innovation. A new economic analysis published this week quantifies the harm. Americans spend $52.3 billion annually through Apple and Google's app stores. If competition pushed down app store fees, consumers could save about $8.9 billion each year. The App Store Freedom Act targets only the largest gatekeepers and offers a pro-market fix. It lets consumers choose alternative stores and default apps, install apps outside the dominant stores, and remove unwanted preloaded apps. It stops forced payment systems and gag rules, and it gives developers fair access to operating system features so they can compete on merit. Opponents say exclusivity is the price of security. It's not. They argue that opening app distribution and alternative app stores will invite malware, scams, and threats to children. And sure, alternative distribution can create risks if poorly managed, but the status quo is already unacceptable. Documented scams and unsafe apps like Nudify apps routinely slip through Apple and Google's security reviews. The answer is strong safeguards, not permanent monopoly control. So to be absolutely clear, nothing in this bill forces someone to use an alternative app store. Apple and Google can keep operating and vetting their own stores. It does not require them to provide support for third-party apps, and it preserves intellectual property and national security safeguards. We know openness and security can coexist. Google's Play protects scans Android apps from outside its store, and Apple secures software outside the Mac App Store. Competition could also produce safe choices, including stores designed specifically for families and children. Security is an engineering challenge, not a monopoly entitlement. H.R. 3209 does not set prices or pick winners. It makes powerful gatekeepers compete so consumers, not corporations, decide which apps and services work best for them. Chairman Guthrie, Chairman Bilrakis, today is an important first step. I urge the committee to continue to work with Congresswoman Kamak and myself to break the duopoly and allow competition in the mobile app space. American consumers have waited long enough. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and I believe the ranking member yields back. Is that correct?
Yes, I yield
Okay,
back.
very good. I'll recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for his 5 minutes opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Bilrakis, and good morning to everyone. Welcome to the committee today. Today, the subcommittee will consider consumer protection legislation at a time when the U.S. marketplace continues to change dramatically. New business practices and advancement in technology bring with them abundant new opportunities for consumers. American consumers have more choices than ever before. With just a few clicks, they can buy products and services from virtually anywhere in the world. But as the marketplace has evolved, so have the risks. Fraudsters have grown more sophisticated, unsafe products are making their way into American homes, and consumers are increasingly forced to navigate a marketplace that is more complex, more confusing, and harder to trust. Our existing Consumer protection laws, including the Federal Trade Commission Act and the Consumer Product Safety Act, are often up for meeting these challenges. However, when there are clear gaps in the existing framework, Congress has a responsibility to examine whether targeted legislative action is needed to protect American families from scams, unfair practices, and dangerous products. The bills before us today address gaps in our consumer protection laws by strengthening anti-fraud efforts, keeping unsafe products imported by Chinese companies out of the American marketplace, and providing consumers with clearer and more consistent information about recycling and product labeling. Many of the bills we are discussing today are bipartisan, and I applaud my colleagues for working across the aisle. Regardless of where Americans shop, consumers deserve confidence that the products they purchase are safe, the information they receive is accurate, and bad actors will be held accountable. I thank all the witnesses for being here today. We look forward to hearing your testimony, and I thank the chairman, and I will yield back.
Chairman yields back. Appreciate it very much. Now we have the ranking member. You're recognized. Oh, okay. Ms. Dingell's pinch hitting for the ranking member today. So you're recognized, Ms. Dingell, for your 5-minute opening statement. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I would like to read a prepared opening statement on behalf of Ranking Member Pallone. Consumers are fed up with impossibly high ticket prices for sporting events and concerts, events that immediately sell out with little clarity about whether more tickets or dates will be offered, and a confusing resale market that leaves consumers unsure of who they can trust. Look no further than the FIFA World Cup. I, along with many of my colleagues, have been critical of FIFA's opaque pricing, shifting rules, and potentially deceptive practices that hurt everyday fans. Let me be clear, this isn't a one-time headache. These anti-fan tactics are rampant in the industry and will continue unless Congress steps in to do something. And that is why I'm glad that today we are considering a discussion draft of my Boss and Swift Act, Mr. Pallone's Boss and Swift Act of 2026, proposed in honor of his late friend and colleague, and all of our late friend and colleague, Rep. Bill Pascrell, who championed fans in this bill for many years. The Boss and Swift Act will bring transparency and fairness to the event ticketing marketplace, including known problems like hidden fees, refund policies and practices, clarity about ticket inventory so consumers can make educated purchasing decisions, prohibiting employees of primary and secondary exchanges from selling tickets at marked up prices and more. I look forward to working with stakeholders on this draft to ensure that fans receive the strongest possible protections when they spend their hard-earned money to buy event tickets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yield back on Mr. Pallone's behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Now we'll hear from the witnesses. We have Mr. John Hewitt, Senior Vice President of the Consumer Brands Association. Welcome. Ms. Celia Winslow, President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Financial Services Association. Welcome. We have Mr. John Breu, Vice President of the National Consumers League. Welcome, sir. And then we have Mr. John Castro, President of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Welcome to all of you today. We appreciate it. And we'll start with Mr. Hewitt. You're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Good morning. Chairman Bilirakis, Ranking Member Schakowsky, members of the committee. On behalf of the Recycling Leadership Council and the Consumer Brands Association, thank you for the opportunity to discuss 2 truth in labeling consumer protection bills pending your committee's consideration. These bipartisan pieces of legislation are critical to addressing a conflicting patchwork that contributes to consumer confusion, discourages investment in recycling technologies, and ultimately affects the affordability of everyday consumer products. The Recycling Leadership Council is a coalition committed to reducing plastic waste and advancing practical, bipartisan solutions to improve recycling outcomes and protect consumers across the country. Consumer Brands Association represents America's food, beverage, household cleaning, and personal care manufacturers, and we are the country's largest domestic manufacturing sector by employment, supporting more than 22 million jobs and $2.5 trillion in GDP. Both the RLC and Consumer Brands members' products are intertwined in the lives of everyday Americans. Consumer transparency, protection, and safety are at the center of everything we do. Packaging is essential to provide safe, affordable, convenient products, and RLC and Consumer Brands members are aiming to achieve greater material circularity. Consumers want to recycle and want packaging to be made with recycled content, and companies are working to reach these goals. This alignment of consumer expectations with the manufacturing community's desire to meet them is the basis for our support of both the Recycled Materials Attribution Act and the Packaging and Claims Knowledge Act. We applaud committee members on both sides of the aisle for their bipartisan support to strengthen consumer protections. Currently, environmental marketing claims are governed by overlapping and conflicting federal and state laws. The cumulative impacts are consumer confusion, unnecessary increased consumer costs, regulatory uncertainty, and stifled economic investment in domestic manufacturing. The RMAA and PAC Act are complementary legislative solutions that will help remedy these problems. RMAA modernizes how recycling and recycled content are defined and attributed. The PAC Act addresses claims of recyclable, compostable, and reusable that appear on the package. Going deeper, the RMAA creates a uniform national framework for recycled content marketing claims, reduces complexity for consumers and businesses, and ensures recycling terms keep pace with innovation. Further, the RMAA clarifies that innovative non-mechanical recycling technologies count as recycling, as they are complementary to our existing mechanical recycling infrastructure. Collectively, these technologies greatly expand the types, formats, and volume of packaging that can effectively be recycled. RMAA's definitions ensure consistent consumer protection while encouraging American innovation and domestic supply chain resilience. Similarly, the PAC Act is intended to reduce consumer confusion when it comes to higher recycling rates and a stronger circular economy. Together, these bipartisan truth in labeling bills before you strengthen consumer protections against deceptive marketing claims, establish nationally consistent standards for businesses, support investment in domestic recycling infrastructure, and improve the efficiency of interstate commerce. I ask for your support in passing these common sense bipartisan pieces of legislation which demonstrate that consumer protection can go hand in hand with promoting affordability, supporting a circular economy, and investing in domestic manufacturing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now we have Ms. Winslow. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
Schakowsky and members of the subcommittee. There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Founded over 100 years ago to help Americans access affordable loans, AFSA is the National Trade Association for the consumer credit industry. Our members have this in common. They succeed when their customers succeed. Lenders prosper when borrowers repay their loans and come back the next time they need credit. I'm here about an industry built on the opposite premise, one for which consumer protection laws are desperately needed. For-profit debt settlement is the only industry in the American economy that instructs its customers to stop paying their bills. In any other market, we would call this sabotage. In this industry, it's called the business plan. Debt settlement companies advertise themselves as the magic bullet, a way to reduce debt and an alternative to bankruptcy. Consumers enrolling with a settlement company are directed to stop making payments and communicating with their creditors. Instead, they're instructed to make payments to a new account, build up funds, and wait for the settlement company to negotiate a settlement with a creditor. In reality, these companies are misleading consumers into financial jeopardy. Accounts default, balances swell with interest and late fees, credit scores collapse, collection calls and lawsuits follow. For this, settlement companies charge 15 to 25% of the consumer's debt. The industry's own report states that the average settlement takes more than 14 months to complete, and roughly 1 in 4 enrollees goes 3 years without settling an account. Consumer complaints reveal that some programs never settle, and it's not unusual for consumers to end up owing more to the debt settlement company than they did to the creditor. But that's not all. Debt settlement companies now lure people who are not in trouble. TransUnion recently found that 53% of debt settlement enrollees were current on their bills the day they signed up. This isn't an industry rescuing desperate consumers. It's an industry that's taking advantage of them. I'll share some examples. A consumer in Prior Lake, Minnesota had $37,000 in credit card debt after a house fire. In her words, they were telling me they were going to be making the payments, but it wasn't true. She learned the truth that none of her payments were going to the card company, only when the creditor called her. A Michigan consumer paid $27,000 into a settlement program, then discovered that less than $6,000 went to the creditor. A Maryland college student's credit score dropped 300 points, and he got sued by his creditor. A Texas service member got a second opinion from a nonprofit credit counselor and learned what his settlement company didn't tell him. The defaults it required could have cost him his security clearance. These problems aren't one-offs. They span the country. Complaints from South Carolina describe expensive fees. From Florida, broken promises. From California, settlement providers that simply stop communicating. The data confirm these aren't exceptions. TransUnion tested the industry's central promise that settlement is a better path than bankruptcy. The industry flunked it. Consumers who were current at enrollment saw their credit scores plunge almost 100 points. Bankruptcy filers only lost 20. The product sold to millions of Americans as a responsible alternative to bankruptcy actually performs worse than bankruptcy. How is this happening? Consider the regulatory imbalance. AFSA's members operate under more than 20 federal financial laws, hundreds of state statutes, and even more regulations. The debt settlement industry, by its own association's account, answers to exactly one federal regulation, not law, the FTC's telemarketing sales rule. Written in 2010, it is literally a telephone rule. A regulation written for the call centers of 2010, while critical, cannot prevent all the harm that occurs today. The federal agencies and state AGs have gone after a multitude of companies in this space, closing more than 400, but enforcement isn't enough. For example, the CFPB and 7 states sued an enterprise that had set up a law firm as a workaround to the one federal regulation the industry is supposed to follow. They tried to collect $100 million consumers had paid in illegal fees, but the money was already gone. Creditors and consumer advocates, who are almost always on opposite sides, agree that there's a serious lack of consumer protection here, but Congress can fix it. First, pass the Debt Settlement Disclosures Act, which prohibits deceptive ads and mandates upfront disclosures and periodic statements. Consumers have filed more than 5,000 debt settlement complaints with the CFPB. Their top issues are didn't provide services promised and confusing or misleading disclosures, broken promises and hidden terms. This bill addresses both, with the same transparency rules that apply to virtually every other consumer financial product. Second, pass the Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention Act. A coordinated federal, state, and private sector strategy is the right response to fraud that costs consumers billions each year. Consumers in distress have real lifelines already. They have hardship programs from their lenders and nonprofit credit counseling. The difference is real money. You can save thousands of dollars with nonprofit credit counselors. We encourage Congress to act. The rapidly expanding debt settlement industry sells hope, but delivers default. And Congress can make honesty the price of doing business in this market. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Now we have, let's see, Mr. Braille. You're recognized, sir.
Chairman Bilirakis, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting the National Consumers League to testify at today's hearing. Founded in 1899, NCL is America's pioneering consumer advocacy organization. For over 125 years, we have worked to protect everyday Americans from deceptive, predatory, and anti-competitive marketplace practices. Today, as you consider legislation shaping the FTC and CPSC, our message is simple. Consumers need strong, independent enforcement agencies with the authority and clear statutory tools to hold corporate wrongdoers accountable. However, before addressing specific bills, I must voice our deep concern regarding ongoing threats to the structural independence of our consumer protection regulators. As you know, the legal landscape has shifted dramatically following rulings like AMG Capital Management and Trump v. Slaughter. These decisions have stripped vital enforcement tools from the FTC's toolbox and harmed agency operational capacity. When independent consumer protection agencies are hamstrung by political pressures, the ultimate casualties are everyday consumers and fair marketplace competition. Stripping these bodies of authority gives a flashing green light to bad actors who exploit regulatory vacuums, and legitimate small businesses suffer when dominant monopolies distort the economic playing field without fear of independent oversight. Court rulings like Trump v. Slaughter do not have to mean the end of proper enforcement. if Congress steps up to its constitutional role. We urge Congress to proactively insulate the FTC and CPSC from political pressure, condition appropriations on agency autonomy, and exercise robust oversight to safeguard law enforcement independence. Turning to market reform now, NCL strongly urges Congress to pass two critical ticketing bills, the Boss and Swift Act and the Main Event Ticketing Act. The Boss and Swift Act is the gold standard for structural reform. Long championed by the late Congressman Bill Pascrell, it mandates transparent all-in pricing. Upfront, it requires primary sellers to disclose holdbacks before sales begin. It prevents primary monopolies like Ticketmaster from restricting ticket resale. It regulates speculative ticket sales, and it prohibits scalping by connected insiders. Second, the Main Event Ticketing Act modernizes the 2016 BOTS Act and closes dangerous enforcement loopholes. Look no further than the FTC's landmark lawsuit against Live Nation and Ticketmaster as proof of why this bill is needed. The FTC's complaint exposed how the Ticketmaster monopoly actively profited from illegal scalper bots, colluding with brokers and turning a blind eye as a matter of policy while triple dipping on primary fees, secondary listing fees, and final resale markups. The Main Event Ticketing Act closes those exact operational loopholes and holds complicit platforms accountable. Consumers' support for common sense ticketing reforms like these is overwhelming. Recent survey data found that 87% of voters support mandating ticket transparency, and 94% want urgent federal action to stop scalper bots. We also want to express our strong support for H.R. 5967, the Strategic Task Force Scam Prevention Act. Fraud has reached epidemic levels, costing Americans an estimated $195.9 billion in 2024 alone, according to the FCC. Again, $195.9 billion in 2024 alone. By establishing a multi-agency task force that consults directly with consumer groups, this bill creates a unified national strategy to protect families from these devastating scams. Finally, we must urge you to reject two product claim bills. H.R. 6832, the PAC Act, sweepingly preempts strong state packaging laws like California's Truth in Labeling law without creating an effective federal standard. And H.R. 7502, the Recycled Materials Attribution Act, legitimizes so-called mass balance accounting, a corporate trick that lets companies claim a bottle has 30% recycled content even when the actual item on the shelf may contain only 0. In closing, Congress must empower our regulators and protect consumers from deceptive practices, whether in live event ticketing, fraud prevention, or product labeling. We urge you to pass meaningful reforms and reject legislation that undermines critical state safeguards. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the gentleman. Appreciate it very much. Now we'll ask Daniel Castro. I apologize for calling you by the wrong first name. Daniel, you're recognized, please.
Great, thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify here today. Online marketplaces have transformed commerce. They give Americans access to more products, lower prices, and opportunities for millions of businesses to reach customers. Congress should preserve those benefits, but those benefits depend on trust. Consumers should have confidence that the products they purchase are authentic, safe, and accurately described, and that the businesses selling them are legitimate. Protecting consumers from dangerous goods, improving transparency, and reducing fraud are essential to maintaining that trust. So over the past year, my think tank has examined several major Chinese online marketplaces serving U.S. consumers. Our research found meaningful differences between these platforms and leading U.S. marketplaces in terms of seller verification, counterfeit detection, marketplace transparency, and enforcement against repeat offenders. And those differences expose American consumers to greater risk from counterfeit products, unsafe goods, and frauds. Our research points to 4 conclusions. First, counterfeit products remain readily available across several major Chinese online marketplaces, and many of those present real consumer safety risk. Our researchers purchased products that appeared suspicious and worked with manufacturers to determine whether they were authentic. we confirmed likely counterfeit products across apparel, cosmetics, toys, over-the-counter medicines, household goods, and pet products. One example stands out. We purchased what appeared to be NutriPra dog treats. That's a UK company. The packaging contained multiple spelling errors, the barcode matched an unrelated product, and the manufacturer confirmed that the product was counterfeit. The company also told us that they had previously received a report that a dog became seriously ill after consuming similar fake treats. We also purchased what appeared to be counterfeit Theraflu cold medicine. Counterfeit medicines are particularly dangerous because consumers have no way of knowing whether they contain the correct ingredients, the proper dosage, harmful contaminants, or any active ingredients at all. These examples show that counterfeit goods are not simply an IP issue. They create direct risk for American consumers. Second, these risks reflect differences in the safeguards that online marketplaces have put in place. Leading US marketplaces have invested heavily in technologies that make online shopping safer. They verify sellers, they use AI to detect fraudulent listings, they identify counterfeit products, manage recalls, and maintain large trust and safety operations. These investments require significant resources, but they reduce fraud and improve consumer confidence. Our research found that several of these major Chinese marketplaces have invested less heavily in these capabilities. Consumers shopping on these platforms often shoulder more responsibility for evaluating unfamiliar sellers, identifying counterfeit listings, and avoiding unsafe products when they receive them, frequently without realizing that the protections available to them on those platforms differ from leading US online marketplaces. Third, existing enforcement remains too reactive to change marketplace behavior. After we published our report, many of the specific counterfeit listings we identified were removed, but follow-up research found additional counterfeit, for example, over-the-counter medicine, appearing on the same platforms, sometimes listed under entirely different product categories. So removing individual listings is necessary, but it does little if repeat offenders can quickly return. And independent evidence points to the same conclusion. After the Consumer Product Safety Commission warned consumers about hazardous products sold through online marketplaces, leading US marketplaces removed those products. Several major Chinese marketplaces, though, continued offering the same or substantially similar items. Likewise, testing commissioned by the Toy Association found that nearly 90% of toys purchased from two leading Chinese marketplaces raised significant safety concerns, with more than 70% failing at least one laboratory safety test. Federal regulators have reached similar conclusions. Last year, the FTC penalized Temu for violating the Informed Consumers Act after determining that it had failed to adequately comply with requirements designed to protect consumers from stolen, counterfeit, and unsafe goods. So fourth, Congress should expect every marketplace serving American consumers to do more to stop counterfeit products, dangerous goods, and fraudulent sellers before reaching consumers. The US has one of the most open digital markets. Major Chinese online marketplaces enjoy broad access to American consumers, but many leading US marketplaces have little or no comparable access to China's domestic market because of long-standing restrictions on foreign digital services. Open markets benefit consumers, but access to the US market should come with clear responsibilities. Companies that want to sell to American consumers should provide reasonable safeguards against counterfeit goods, dangerous products, and fraud. Congress should therefore focus on creating stronger incentives for prevention rather than primarily relying on enforcement after harm has already occurred. Better seller verification, stronger action against repeat offenders, greater transparency, and closer cooperation would significantly address that. I want to thank you again for your attention to this issue and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much. Thank all of y'all. Y'all did a great job with your testimony. We appreciate it very much. Learned a lot. Okay, Mr. Castro, thank you for bringing attention to the true cost of Chinese imports, which can be unacceptably high for Americans who buy goods for their family with dangerous lead dangerous lead levels and toxic chemicals. The People's Republic of China has long blocked American online platforms from selling into the Chinese market, as you said, despite American companies having higher standards of governance than their Chinese competitors. That's pretty obvious. By contrast, Chinese platforms such as Shein and Temu have open access to American consumers and often fail to meet basic U.S. consumer product safety standards. I'm pleased to see that a proposal from my fellow Floridian here, Laurel Lee, would put an end to an unfair status quo that endangers American consumers. Can you share how the stop?
Okay, so let me just summarize quickly what this hearing is about, because we've definitely gotten a few people coming in just not understanding. So this is a hearing. It took place July 22nd, so just a couple weeks ago. It's Congress, and it's the Subcommittee for Energy and Commerce. And basically, this hearing is about a couple things. One of the main things it's about, though, is the App Store freedom, and hopefully they'll get into this a little bit more. One of the speakers spoke about this at the beginning, but it's part of a bill that addresses a few other key points. But this one thing, the App Store freedom, HR 3209, would reduce Apple and Google's control over how apps are distributed and paid for by allowing competing app stores, alternative payment systems, and more direct installation of apps. But supporters argue this would increase competition, consumer choice, and opportunities for developers, but critics warn that weakening the existing App Store gatekeeper system could make it easier for fraudulent apps, malware, impersonators, and other scams to reach consumers. So the central debate is whether greater freedom and competition in the app marketplace can be achieved without sacrificing the security and protections that consumers have from the major app stores. So, I mean, that's really interesting. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. Because right now, whether you have an iPhone or a Android, you either purchase apps for the most part from the Apple App Store or from the Google App Store. And basically, Apple or Google gets to decide whether those apps can be published or not. So you have that security from these companies, allegedly. So one party, and I'm not talking about like Republicans or Dems, but one side thinks that we should open up the app stores and, you know, allow more freedom where more app developers don't have to go through Google or Apple and they can be able to publish their apps. But the critics, which I understand both sides. The critics argue that Google and Apple, because they're vetting these apps and they're going through the App Store, they can prevent some of the malware, the scams, which, I don't know, guys. I'm all in favor of like freedom and, you know, being able to get whatever app and download it if you want, but I see a lot of people falling for those scams. Like, I just foresee it. Because right now we have like a huge issue in this country, especially amongst our senior population, and I'm sure they're gonna get into this more in this hearing. Seniors are very susceptible to scams. It's funny because earlier today, I started creating like a guide for seniors how to avoid scams. So that'll be published later this week. But it's like a huge problem in America where our senior population is getting scammed multiple different ways, but a lot of it has to do with their smartphones or their computer, sometimes crypto or whatnot. So, I don't know. You guys tell me how you feel in the comments. Let's continue this.
The Fraud Act would work in practice, and if you want to elaborate a little bit, you're welcome to.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So the Stop the Fraud Act, really does two important things. One, it directs the Consumer Product Safety Commission to publish a list of these foreign adversary-controlled online marketplaces that it develops with input from the various national security agencies in the United States. And then it would direct the importers, sellers, basically anyone distributing these products to not do that if from any entity involved that's been designated on one of these lists. And that would have just significant implications because, again, if you look at the types of products that are coming in, this basically says you can't do that anymore. You have to look and see where these products are coming from. And if they're coming from one of these platforms that are known to be a significant source of these harmful, dangerous goods, you have to stop engaging in that activity. I think it's a very useful and important step, especially, again, given the lack of reciprocity that the U.S. Companies have to the Chinese market.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Good explanation. Ms. Winslow, the Federal Trade Commission found that scams and fraud costed older Americans $2.4 billion in 2024, level 4.
Personally, I think the FTC is doing a terrible job of preventing these scams. I think that they don't go after the right people. I think many of the scams happen from offshore agents. And the issue with that is, you know, the FTC is a government agency. They can't prosecute, per se, people that are offshore. So they tend to go after the low-hanging fruit, or like supposed the low-hanging fruit. And I feel like, especially with some of the consumer laws out there that are really ambiguous and have not kept up with technology, that they tend to go after companies that actually are trying to do things the right way and are not scamming people whatsoever. But they go after them on like a technicality just so they can say that they've prevented something or done something whatsoever. But the problem is the real scammers then never get caught. And that's why I think that scamming from offshore has become more and more prevalent, because the reality is in the last few years it's gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better. So I think the FTC really needs to rethink the way that they're doing things, because in my opinion it's really just hurting people, not only some of the businesses in America, but also the consumers, especially our seniors, because they're really not doing much to prevent like the real scammers, because they don't have that authority to go after them per se offshore. So maybe that's something that they need to address with like a foreign relations committee, or, you know, I think we all know there's a handful of companies that have these call centers, and maybe partner with their government to stop it. But I do not think that they're doing a great job whatsoever.
Times higher than 2020. Can you discuss these trends and outline how the American Financial Services Association and its members protect seniors from fraud and scams?
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Chairman. Fraud is increasing at an alarming rate, and it's being driven, at least in part, by these influencers on social media who are preying on vulnerable Americans. Whether it's debt settlement scammers with false promises for a quick fix, or illegal hacks telling consumers they can clean their credit by filing fake credit disputes or false ID theft complaints. So AFSA's been working with the Federal Trade Commission to identify these fraudulent social media accounts, and with Congress on important legislation like the Debt Settlement Disclosure Act and the Ending Scam Credit Repair Act. We think that this legislation and the important hearings that this committee is having, and the agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and DOJ working together, we can cut down on the misinformation that's getting out and the scams that are taking advantage of our seniors here in this country.
All right, thanks very much. I have a little more time left. Mr. Hewitt, businesses that manufacture and sell products nationwide are currently navigating different and sometimes conflicting state laws and standards governing recycled content claims. How does that patchwork affect investment, innovation, and the ability of companies to increase their use of recycled material, please?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Currently, the patchworks that exist across the United States are providing uncertainty for businesses and consumers alike. With respects to consumers, that uncertainty prevents them from recycling. With respects to businesses, they have to navigate a multitude of different recycling rules, requirements with respects to the marketing claims that correspond with them across the country. Ultimately, that creates inefficiencies in their operating, as well as discourages domestic investments in the infrastructure that's needed to increase recycled content and ultimately reduce the amount of packaging that ends up in landfills.
A very good explanation. All right, my time has expired, so I'll yield 5 minutes to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Schakowsky, for her questioning.
Thank you so much. Mr. Brehow.
What could happen to consumers?
What could happen to consumers after the Supreme Court decision?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Our concern about the impact on consumers and honest businesses stemming from the Trump v. Slaughter decision is that agencies that were stood up to be independent of political considerations can no longer be so absent more engagement from Congress. These are agencies that were created to be bipartisan in nature, to follow the law and enforce our statutes, regardless of who controlled the White House. And so our concern is that these agencies, particularly ones that are in light of the fact that many of them have already been seen their staffing levels cut significantly under this administration, that in addition to those bandwidth considerations, they now have to look over their shoulder and consider the political implications of their decisions in ways that they didn't have to before. We think that that increases the risk that harms in the marketplace, that harm consumers, both from product safety and deceptive practices, will be exacerbated, not at a time when we need more, not less protection.
How do we fix the bills on today's docket?
How do we fix a bill?
How do we fix the bills?
So what would be a way to talk about how we can improve the bills?
Yes, thank you. In particular, while we are strong supporters of the Scam Prevention Act, and we appreciate that it envisions helping consumers recover from these scams in addition to focusing on prevention, we do think that more can and should be done. We know that consumers are frequently told when they've been victims of scams that there's no way to recover their money. We hear from consumers all the time at fraud.org who are told, you sent the money, even though we all agree that there was fraud involved. Since you hit the button to send, there's nothing we can do, and now you're out. Thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. These can be consumers' entire life savings, and there's no way for them to recover that. So we would hope that bills like the Scam Prevention Act would think about how federal policy can help those consumers, can create incentives like we've seen in other countries, like in the UK, in Australia, in Singapore, that do look at how consumers can recover from these scams and be made whole at the end of the day. At the end of the day, that's what we want.
Do you think we're doing our best to protect consumers right now?
I think there's much more that can be done. As my colleague to my right mentioned, the numbers on fraud keep getting worse every year. We see more consumers being affected. We see more money being lost. I speculate that if I polled everybody in this room and asked how many of you have a personal experience with fraud, I would have well over 80% of people raising their hands. This is a crime that is affecting millions of Americans every year and goes underreported, and we need to do more. In particular, we need to put more responsibility on the businesses, the social media platforms, the financial services companies, the telcos, who have the power and the resources to better protect consumers from these scams. We can't continue to rely on consumers to be on the front line of reducing and avoiding scams when the scammers themselves are more organized and technologically savvy, with AI being used increasingly than they ever have been.
I couldn't agree more that we have to protect consumers. Number one, that's the most important thing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize the Vice Chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Falter, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just start by saying this issue on the packaging was brought to my attention, our office's attention, through Chobani, which is heavily impacted by as a function of this. And so we are still trying to learn all the ramifications of it. But Mr. Burrell, I have a letter dated July 13, 2026 from the Teamsters of California. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I would request unanimous consent to enter that in the record. It's from Teamsters of California.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in that letter, it says, our union was proud to support SB 54 in 2022. We represent thousands of sanitation and recycling workers and have long championed source reduction and strong recycling infrastructure to protect public health, local recycling jobs. But now that regulations are finalized and the producer responsibility organization's draft plan and fee schedule are public, we have heard from virtually every employer category we represent that the program as structured is unworkable. So that's from the Teamster letter. CalCycle's standard regulatory impact assessment estimated $21 billion in total implementation costs, with large producers paying roughly at $406,000 annually. The source reduction alone will cost $15.4 billion. So there's obviously more to that, but Mr. Brault, I would just ask, what's a greater threat to California's workers, consumers, and businesses? Keeping SB 54 intact or getting rid of it?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. I've not had an opportunity to review the letters that you mentioned. However, we do believe that states play a key role in truth in labeling laws. States like California in particular are ones that set the standard for the rest of the country. We know that when California takes action on a whole range of consumer safety and consumer protection issues, the rest of the country tends to follow. And so we really do look to them as a bellwether for what industry can do. And certainly with regards to product packaging and product labeling, we believe that their law can and should continue to do that. And we're concerned about federal bills that may preempt the ability of states like California to continue to play the role they've historically played in terms of being laboratories of democracy in this area.
And how is a supplier, how are users expected to be able to adhere to these costs that are unique for a particular state and not anywhere else?
Well, I can't speak for producers. What I can say is that consumers believe that truth in labeling is a very important thing, and when they go to buy products in the marketplace, they want to make sure that what they see on the shelf is actually, the claims made are accurate.
I can tell you that you'll have, and you do have, a lot of opposition in the producer world, and it's exactly why. It's incredibly expensive, and it's difficult to comply for one state. Mr. Hewitt, you represent the Consumer Brands Association Recycling Leadership Council, so you should be pretty familiar with recycling. In your opinion, does SB 54, is that well-intended or infeasible and cost prohibitive?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for the question. As someone who personally worked on SB 54 during the legislative process, I think that the intentions were, everything was well intended, but I think it's safe to say, as you noted from the Teamsters letter, that the costs of implementation are exorbitant, and they're even greater than what the state estimated during their initial economic assessment. A recent study that was published by Californians for Affordable Packaging estimated that the actual cost is going to be somewhere between 56 and 78 billion, much higher than referenced in the Teamsters letter. And what that equates to for the average Californian family is an increase in grocery costs of $683 to $948 per year for those respective households. The good news, or the good thing, and what we're here to support today on behalf of the Recycling Leadership Council and the Consumer Brands Association, is we have an opportunity to simplify the recycling process, reduce packaging that goes to landfills, and provide consumer protections through standardized definitions that allow us to define terms like recyclable, recycled content. Having these standardized federal definitions is going to establish a common regulatory framework across the country that in turn provides consumers with a clear understanding with what recycling means and what can be recycled, and also provide companies with the certainty to invest in scalable recycling infrastructure across the United States.
All right. Mr. Hewitt, thank you for that, and appreciate your input there. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate it very much, and I'll recognize Representative Castor for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for calling this hearing. Thank you to our witnesses today. The Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Product Safety Commission have very important responsibilities in protecting American consumers. They are the cops on the beat to stop fraudulent, unfair, and deceptive practices and ensure product safety. Without the FTC and the CPSC, Americans would constantly be at the mercy of scam artists and faulty, unsafe products. It's hard enough out there in the world today combating scams, and that's why it's been so disheartening watching what has been happening to the FTC and CPSC over the past 19 months. The administration has worked to actually gut these independent agencies. Professionals have been arbitrarily fired. Many have taken their skills and expertise elsewhere. Commissioners have been removed arbitrarily. They've gutted so many of the fundamental roles of these independent agencies. There's Congress directed that they're independent and bipartisan. And Mr. Braille, I heard you loud and clear when you said, due to the recent Trump versus Slaughter ruling, where the court said the president can remove leaders of independent agencies, you anticipate that these agencies will now be subject to more political pressure and kind of undermine their independence. That is in direct contradiction to what the Congress intended. So how should the Congress react here? Is there room to of these important consumer protection agencies in the wake of the Slaughter decision?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. Yes, I do believe that there's an important role for Congress to play to address the gutting of these important consumer protection agencies and the reduction in their independence. Congress created these agencies in such a way because they wanted them to be independent. They wanted them to follow the law and to take on businesses that were harming consumers. When these agencies have to look over their shoulder and wonder whether they'll get fired for going after the wrong company, then that will harm consumers. Not only will it harm consumers, it will harm the businesses that rely on a level playing field to compete effectively. And so I think that Congress can and should seek to restore the independence of these agencies. In addition, there are other levers that Congress has available to you. Oversight, for example, control over the purse strings of these agencies through the appropriations process. Those are all tools that the Trump v. Slaughter decision did nothing to erode, and I would encourage you and your colleagues here in Congress to continue to use those levers to the greatest extent possible.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I think that we need to act to restore the independence and the power of these independent bipartisan agencies moving forward. I would think that should be the top of the list. A lot of these bills are very good, but we're talking about the fundamental purpose of these agencies. We need to get back to that. Mr. Castor, I heard you also loud and clear about faulty products coming from China that are counterfeit and unsafe on Chinese marketplaces, but I'm hearing from a lot of American businesses that are concerned about the American online marketplaces and the infiltration of unsafe and counterfeit.
You know, it's really so funny to me because I've done a lot of these hearings in the last few months, and everyone brings up China and how China is counterfeit and they're trying to poison us and they send us low quality stuff. But the reality is our FDA does a terrible job, and I'm sure our FTC as well just does such a terrible job just policing the stuff that's in our country, that's American made. And I talk about this a lot because I stream like 3 different hearings about it. But if you're new here, I want you to know that the majority of our generic drugs come from offshore. They come from India, but primarily China. And our lovely FDA and Congress, because they set the rules, they do not require any testing, any government testing, any independent testing whatsoever on those drugs when they hit our shore. And one of the hearings in the Senate, it was called Poison Pills. And they had a few experts on talking about how they independently tested some of these generic drugs. And they found all types of toxins and chemicals in them. And they feel, some of these doctors feel or think or did actual studies to prove that these generic medications that are coming from offshore are actually giving our seniors dementia, kidney failure, and all kinds of different issues. And when patients would go to their doctors and complain, hey, you know, you put me on this generic, but I'm feeling different. I think that there's something wrong with this generic. Their doctors will tell them, no, you're wrong, and gaslight them and tell them that it's all in their head. But the truth is, No, I'm not lying. I'm not lying. Please don't take my word for this. Go to senate.gov. This hearing was just a couple months ago, okay? You don't have to believe me. I'm not lying. I'm not making this up. Go watch it for yourself. You guys are ridiculous. Really, you are. But anyways, so we have no idea what is in those generic medications when they come to our shore because our FDA, they're in cahoots with Big Pharma. They're in cahoots with the pharmacy benefit managers, and they don't really care what's in them. At the end of the day, those guys get their pockets lined from Big Pharma, from insurance lobbyists, and they don't really care about us because they won't even test the drugs that come from offshore, and they scream at these hearings, China, China, China. China's trying to kill us. China's so bad. We have to protect ourselves from China. But they don't do anything to actually protect us. They really don't. No, it's not true. You guys, please don't call me an idiot and don't call me a liar when you have no idea what you're talking about. So generic drugs, in order to be generic, they have to have 100% of the same active ingredient. With that being said, though, the inactive ingredient does not have to be the same whatsoever. And some drugs have 99% inactive ingredients. So 99% of the formulation is completely different than the brand. But here's the thing, since we do not independently test these drugs when they come from offshore, we actually have no idea what's in them. But if you, you don't have to believe me, just look for yourself, but don't call me a liar. It's ridiculous.
Products from China and other parts of the world. How do we tackle that problem?
It's a great question because, the reality is, of course, these counterfeiters are trying to sell on every platform they can. They want to get access to the American consumers. I don't think any platform is going to have a perfect record in this space. What I do think, though, is that we want to continue to improve the accountability on these platforms, because when you look at what's happening here, it's not just one random seller. These are often networks of individuals that are working to get these products out here. They're on multiple platforms. There's a lot that we can be doing for responsible actors. For example, data sharing to say, I found this seller, and now I'm going to not only take them off my platform, but I'm going to take them off other platforms by letting DHS have this information. DHS can validate it and then share it with the other American platforms. I think there's a lot that government and industry can do.
Whose role would that be? Would you look to the Consumer Product Safety Commission? Sometimes it could be a safety issue, but it's also a counterfeiting.
It has to be, I think, a combination. Some of it's CBP and DHS that are receiving this information that could also stop some of this at the border. Some of it should be the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There's a lot of different angles to this, and so I think they all should be working together.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie from Kentucky, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate for the recognition. I want to start by thanking my friend from Texas, Mr. Weber, for his thoughtful leadership on the PAC Act, which advances thoughtful approach to improving confidence in packaging. The bill's reliance on independent accredited third-party certification rather than allowing claims to rest solely in a company's own representation is important, and the bill also appropriately places enforcement with the FTC, their long-established consumer protection authority, while recognizing EPA's technical expertise and advisory capacity. So I say all that to say, Mr. Hewitt, would you explain how those complementary roles create a credible and durable framework for ensuring truthful packaging claims and why that approach strengthens consumer protection?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the question. First and foremost, the PAC Act, as well as the Recycled Materials Attribution Act, does two distinct things. One, it provides standardized definitions along with the third-party verification to ensure consumer protection. Whether it's the PAC Act or RMAA, those are two items that they both have in common, Mr. Chairman. Although the green guides, which the FTC's green guides, which were last updated more than 12 years ago, have long served as the primary national framework for environmental marketing claims, those guides are just that, they're guidance. And in and of themselves don't resolve the conflicting state patchwork that's currently going on. So with respects to the PAC Act, when a consumer picks up a product and tries to make a decision here in Washington, D.C. about whether or not it's recyclable or not, they want to have that certainty to know that that product is actually recyclable, and it comes with a third-party verification that goes with it. They cross the river, go to their home, maybe in Virginia or Maryland. Again, they want to have the certainty that that claim that's being made and that instruction that's being provided is in fact true in and of itself. PAC Act and RMAA, as I mentioned, both advance the FTC's longstanding consumer protection mission by providing statutory definitions that complement and not replace the existing FTC authority over deceptive marketing claims, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Castro, I'm going to ask you this. As millions of Americans shop online, they expect to have safe products. Chinese online retailers and marketplaces have increasingly sold products that fail to, finding 90% of the toys sold on these platforms fail to meet federal standards. We've seen attorney generals, state attorney generals have brought suits against these actions against these platforms. So, Mr. Castro, ITIF has done extensive research into the problem of dangerous products sold on Chinese platforms. Why are these companies repeatedly failing to meet U.S. product safety standards, and what should Congress do to better protect consumers and bolster enforcement?
What we see is that it's a clear pattern, and it's not just a pattern, it's a strategy that these companies are using to gain global market share and take it away from American companies. The Chinese government is intentionally allowing these companies to engage in creating the counterfeits, selling them, and distributing them. This is part of their strategy, and this not only affects, of course, online marketplaces, but many of the online marketplaces in the United States. These are run by major American technology companies that are investing in AI and what's going to be the future of the American economy. So this is a significant impact. It goes well beyond just the counterfeits and the IP theft and then the harm to consumers. It really gets to fundamental issues of national security and economic security. And so I think that's why they allow it. And it's a great way to attract consumers if you say you're selling something for half the price or sometimes a tenth of the price. But the reality is the products that you receive are dangerous, unsafe, and not the authentic product.
That's true, and nothing, zero. You couldn't sell a can of beans in a local grocery store in China without the government knowing what you're doing. So my next question for Ms. Winslow. Unfortunately, every member of this committee has had constituents with scams. The FBI reported 1 million reports of internet fraud resulting in $20 billion in losses. So, Ms. Winslow, how are your members helping to fight the fraud epidemic, and what more can Congress do to help protect Americans and hold bad actors accountable?
Thank you very much.
Hi, Alicia.
AI
Shout out to
accelerates
you.
fraud incredibly, and so we've been looking at various different ways that we can stop it. We need the FTC's help. For example, their database, you can submit a false claim of identity theft to the FTC very easily, and then your credit gets cleaned. And so working with the FTC, and we'd love to work with Congress and the FTC to make that process a little harder. We want to make sure that customers or consumers who really had their identity stolen can get help quickly and easily, but the number of fake disputes are making that harder. There's just thousands of form letters that are being sent in, and that's covering up the real crime that's happening.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I'll yield back the time I don't have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Everyone loves music. That's why I'm excited to see that the Boston Swift Act is being heard to artists like Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift. These tours were so popular, along with Beyonce's tour, that millions wanted to go. So popular that it moved GDP. That is saying something. And what ensued for a lot of these folks, unfortunately, was a disaster for consumers. We saw some falling victim to ticket scams and websites that didn't even have access to the tickets. Others saw bots gobble up tickets. Others saw tickets surge in price through third-party resales. It's a big business, too. When you look at online ticket sales, it was $12.7 billion in 2024.
So I brought this up the last time that they talked about Ticketmaster, but I just have to point this out. So during the Ticketmaster hearing this year, Kid Rock was one of the speakers. He testified about all the issues that he has personally had with Ticketmaster, about them, just really inflating pricing and how it actually does not benefit the artist. It hurts the artist. He couldn't even get tickets that he wanted to give out to fans and friends and whatnot. So the hearing was really good. Mr. Dave streamed it. I don't know, it maybe not this year, maybe it was last year. I think it was like 6 months ago. But anyways, so the mainstream media really did not report about this hearing whatsoever. It really put Ticketmaster in a bad light. But coincidentally, that day that the hearing streamed, there was this outrage on social media about Kid Rock, about his lyrics from 1999, where I think one of the lyrics talked about like a underage kid or an underage girl. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 26 years later, the internet was like up in arms about Kid Rock and his lyrics. Granted, nobody has ever cared about this lyric for 26 years, but just coincidentally, right after he testified against Ticketmaster being a monopoly, that's when everybody started, being against him, calling out his lyrics. But again, nobody brought up the fact that that day, coincidentally, he talked about Ticketmaster being a monopoly. I just found that was really interesting.
The resale market is $2.85 billion. Florida is known for hosting a lot of these major events, especially some of those early concerts when it's cold everywhere else in the nation. So I was excited to see new transparency requirements in the Boston Swift Act to ban fraudulent ticketing websites, crack down on bots that are buying all the tickets and raising prices for consumers. All this is going to be absolutely a critical part. Mr. Brayall, it'd be great to get an understanding of how many of these sites exist where you literally think you're buying a ticket, but they don't even have the ticket yet. They're going to try to buy it after you already give them your money. Is this a common practice?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. What the practice you're just sellers claim to have a ticket often before the tickets are even made available to the general public. They list them for sale on websites and on ticket marketplaces, and then consumers who buy them, these sellers then go and try and buy the tickets later on and deliver them to you, and then pocket whatever difference they can. We think that this is a widespread practice. It's one that's been widely reported. We think it's inherently deceptive, and we've supported legislation at both the federal and the state level that would ban it outright.
And then how do bots work? How do bots end up buying tickets?
Well, we know that ticket resellers will use sophisticated ticket buying bot software. These are software programs that can go out and scoop up thousands or millions of tickets in the blink of an eye, far faster than an average fan can. We think that, again, bots are the scourge of this industry and that they should also be outlawed.
Okay, so I think it's Spine Feet wrote, government has no business trying to help the consumer. Let the market work like it should. So I have mixed thoughts on this. I agree with you, being the true libertarian that I really am. I have to agree. I don't want a lot of government involvement. And many times when the government gets involved, like the FDA, like the FTC, things get inherently worse. And this act, this Scam Protection Act, or whatever they're calling it, I feel like it's going to go on the same trajectory as the Affordable Care Act. We call it the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, but it's literally the opposite. There's nothing affordable about our ACA marketplace whatsoever. The name is a joke. So I kind of feel like this Scam or Fraud Protection Act could be the same thing. It's just going to invite more scams. But at the same time, we have a Federal Trade Commission. What are they doing? I was under the understanding that their job is to help the consumer and prevent scams and frauds. Isn't that what they do? So if they're not going to do that, then what are they doing? Maybe, though, because I do agree with what he said, maybe we should just not have an FTC. Kind of like I feel like we should not have an FDA. Maybe we just need to defund the FTC as well. This could be our next mug this week. Stay tuned. And let me know what you think in the chat.
We were proud to be a supporter of the original BOTS Act back in 2016. However, I think over the past 10 years, history has shown that unscrupulous Scalpers continue to employ them, and so we are urging Congress to step in with bills like the Main Event Ticketing Act and put a stop to them once and for all.
Mr. Castro, you had mentioned your testimony that there are some third-party sales that are positive. What would some of those be examples of? Obviously, I bought tickets on resale before from like season ticket holders who didn't want to go to a game, as an example. What are some examples of those?
Yeah, it's a great question, and generally supportive of the goals of the bill. I pointed out, for example, that the Savannah banana ball that people, they've specifically tried to create a fan-first experience where they're focused on how can they allow trading of tickets for someone that can't go. They don't impose any of the kind of restrictions that you see on these other platforms. They're not capturing, double dipping on the fees. It's really about making sure that people can get access to these tickets and that there's not scalpers raising up the price. So my suggestion is that, if you're looking at this type of legislation, you differentiate offers that are out there with the unscrupulous ones, which I think we all want to get rid of.
Sure. And Ms. Winslow, after law school, my dear friend who graduated with me from GW Law and then ended up going to the Florida National Guard and wanted to buy a home, and he had done one of these debt settlement agreements a while ago before that and was shocked to know that he couldn't buy a home for 7 years after that settlement. Would the Debt Settlement Disclosure Act disclose some of the consequences of debt settlement versus bankruptcy versus simply paying your bills if you're able to do so?
Thank you so much. Yes, the Debt Settlement Disclosure Act would absolutely help service members and others like your friend who thought that they had a easier solution or a consumer-friendly solution and ended up being trapped, that didn't realize their credit scores were going to drop, that they wouldn't be able to get future loans. And so something like this, it's an important disclosure mechanism. It's what everyone else in the industry does. Before you take out a loan, you get a disclosure right up front that tells you how much you're going to pay each month, what the interest rate is, et cetera. So just bringing some of those common sense things over to the debt settlement industry that now has 10 to 14 billion.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I yield back.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Ms. Kamick from the great state of Florida for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie, and go Gators. And thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, for your leadership on this subcommittee. Particularly grateful today for placing H.R. 3209 within the bills being discussed today, the App Store Freedom Act. I am so proud to lead this bipartisan legislation alongside my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Lori Trahan. Now, something that shouldn't need to be said, but we're going to say here today, is that consumer protection begins with a simple principle, common sense. If a company overcharges you, mistreats you, or stops earning your trust, you should be able to take your business elsewhere. In almost every market in America, you can, except on your smartphone, you can't. So Apple and Google's operating systems power more than 99% of smartphones in the United States. Apple controls app distribution through the iPhone, and Google controls roughly 90% of app distribution on Android. And Apple and Google, they don't just compete in the market, they control the market. They own the road, they own the storefront, they own the checkout counter, they write the rules, and then they charge everyone a toll just to pass through the gate. The developer builds the product, and Apple and Google, well, they collect the toll. Meanwhile, American families and consumers are paying the price. An independent economic analysis estimates that if real competition replaced the monopoly pricing, American consumers could save nearly $9 billion every year. And that's about $112 annually for a family of 4 using smartphones. And that may not matter in Silicon Valley, but it matters back home. $112 is 10 weeks worth of school lunches for folks in my district. And this is just one of countless examples where the duopoly of Apple and Google are costing consumers real money. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the study entitled U.S. Consumer Benefits of Unlocking Competition in App Distribution on Smartphones.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. The App Store Freedom Act restores consumer choice. It allows consumers to choose alternative app stores, install apps outside the dominant stores if they choose, select competing payment systems, and removes the gatekeeper's ability to block competition before it ever reaches consumers. One of today's witnesses from ITIF, they're arguing that this bill, in their testimony, would weaken privacy and security safeguards. This is the same organization that lists Apple and Google among the organizations contributing to their organization, $10,000 or more. And respectfully, I think they have it backwards. In their own testimony, they acknowledge that the marketplace increasingly needs competition to protect the quality and the protections on the store. Exactly. And that's what our bill provides. It enables that. So today, Apple and Google prevent meaningful competition. They're the gatekeepers. They're the only game in town. And when their security systems fail, and they do, consumers have nowhere else to go. That isn't security, that is captivity. So just days ago, San Francisco city attorney sent Apple and Google cease and desist letters demanding that they remove 13 AI Nudify and Face Swap apps allegedly used to facilitate non-consensual sexual images. The city further alleges that the platforms collected a cut of the in-app purchases while those apps remained available. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record an article titled "Apple and Google Ordered to Purge Nudify Apps from Their App Stores."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Researchers also identified more than 200 fleeceware apps that generated over 1 billion downloads and hundreds of millions of dollars through deceptive subscriptions after passing through these same app stores. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the article titled "Apple's Tightly Controlled App Store is Teeming with Scams."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And the security failures do not stop there. A recent investigation by the Tech Transparency Project found that Apple and Google continue to distribute VPN applications from undisclosed ties to Chinese companies, including the Chinese military. According to the report, many of these apps remain available even after Apple and Google were alerted to the risks. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record this report entitled "Spot Check: Apple and Google Still Have a Chinese VPN Problem," and a Forbes article from April 12th of this year titled "The FBI Issues a Chinese App Warning for Smartphone Users."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. You can probably tell we come with receipts. Now, these companies are telling Congress that they alone can protect Americans, yet they have nowhere else to go, our consumers. Apple isn't short on money. It's short on competitive pressure. When no one can leave, it has no incentive to improve. This bill does not eliminate the App Store or Google Play, and it doesn't force anyone to use an alternative. If Apple builds the best App Store, consumers will choose it. If Google offers the best security, consumers will stay. But they should have to earn that business, not lock Americans into it. The App Store Freedom Act puts the principle of choice and competition into practice. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a final item, a coalition letter supporting H.R. 3209 from the Little Tech Association.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. This bill doesn't pick winners and losers. It lets consumers decide who they want to use, and it lets consumers choose. We can do that by passing this bill. Let's make Apple and Google compete for Americans' trust instead of assuming it. I respectfully urge the committee to place H.R. 3209 onto a markup agenda this Congress, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Well, first off, I love Kat Kamik. I think she's great. She's a congresswoman in a smaller area of Florida, and I really think that she is one of the good guys. She's well-spoken. And I have clients that live in her district, and they only sing her praises. And I feel like she really isn't about political theater, you know, and like she said, she always comes with receipts. But anyways, so I made a comment in the chat, and I don't think people understood what I was saying. So what I was saying, and I wasn't talking about anybody in the chat, I wasn't talking about anybody on this screen, I made the comment that communists like monopolies. And what I mean by that, and why I brought it up, is because I think I was listening to Tim Dillon earlier today, and he talked about this. Basically, let's give the example of like Mamdani, what Mamdani is trying to do in New York City. And he wants everybody to have equality. Maybe it wasn't Tim Dillon. I take that back. Maybe it was Ben Bankus. It was Ben Bankus that was talking about it. Ben Bankus. So Ben Bankus was saying his dad was telling him about the country he grew up in, and they were a communist country. And in a communist country, whether you're a plumber or you're a doctor, you make the same salary. So first of all, it doesn't encourage people to be superior and to excel. If you as a doctor are going to make the same money as like the garbage man or a plumber, maybe you don't want to do all that school and that work to become a doctor. Whereas here in the United States, you know, when you become a doctor, it's an esteemed profession, you tend to make a lot of money, it's worth all that studying, right? So in a communist society, if you are a plumber or you are a doctor, you work for one company, you work for this one monopoly of plumbers, where everybody, regardless of how long you've worked there, how good of a job you do, you make the same salary as everybody else. So that's what I was talking about when I said that communists like monopolies, because it's just one company in control, there's no competition, and then they can do what they want. And this chat has been really good in the last 30 minutes. You guys have been saying some awesome and amazing stuff and some really, really smart comments. What I really loved reading earlier was talking about how important it is that we do have competition. And it seems like a lot of you guys are in favor of this act, the App Act, that we need to end the monopoly that Apple and Google have in their app store. We need to allow other companies to get involved and to be able to download apps that aren't necessarily approved or go through Apple or Google. So you guys like that idea. You're not concerned about malware or scams. So I think that's really cool. You know, like I said before, I tend to prefer less government control, but playing devil's advocate, I can also see why living in like a libertarian paradise that I want to live in could not work for this country. And the reason for it is that there are many people that they don't read the fine print. And to be like truly independent, truly libertarian, you have to be somebody that reads the fine print and understands what you're doing, because you no longer have that government oversight on what you're doing. I would prefer to live in a world like that. I would prefer to live in a world where we have less government control. But I also can acknowledge that a lot of people in America would get hurt if we lived in a society like that. Because unfortunately, people in this country don't read the fine print. They like being a victim. They expect somebody else to do the work for them, to give them the source. I see it all the time on my channel. Like when you guys yelled at me and called me a liar when I quoted a Senate hearing, okay? Like you won't even go and look at the hearing that I'm talking about. You would just rather call me a liar, but whatever. But if everybody could do their own research, take responsibility for their own lives, then we could live in this wonderful libertarian paradise. But I just don't think America is ready for that right now.
The gentlelady yields back. Now we'll recognize Mr. Mullen for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to the chair and ranking member for including my bill, H.R. 7945, the Nitrous Oxide Safety Act, in today's hearing. Nitrous oxide misuse is real and a growing problem. 14 million Americans say they have misused the chemical, and fatalities have increased by 578% in the past decade. Even a single use can cause debilitating effects like blood clots and neurological damage. Despite these risks, nitrous oxide is being marketed as a party drug with names like Miami Magic and Galaxy Gas in brightly colored canisters and flavors. This is clearly targeting both kids and adults for recreational use. Companies claim it's merely for making whipped cream. I learned of how widespread this product is when a youth commissioner in my home county, San Mateo County in California, which I am proud to represent, proposed a retail ban. I had also heard from constituents about this issue when I was serving in the California State Assembly.
So I want to read a comment because it is important. So 2026 H1X wrote, Kat Kamick had to beg DeSantis to approve an abortion for her when she had an ectopic pregnancy. Would have died from an anti-abortion law. Yeah, I remember that. That was not great. And I thought that maybe she would be more of an advocate for that law that was passed in Florida. So back in, I think it may have, I don't know if it was 2024 or 2025 when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now the abortion laws go back to the states. So in Florida, Governor DeSantis passed this law. It wasn't voted on or anything, but he put together this law that you can't have an abortion unless after 6 weeks of pregnancy. And the issue with that is that because of some of the strict abortion laws, and this isn't just happening in Florida, this is in other states as well, but because of these laws in place, a lot of providers and hospitals are unsure about what they can and cannot do. So in Kat Kamick's situation, she was having an ectopic pregnancy and she could have lost her life. And under the law, she wasn't having an abortion per se. She needed to have an emergency treatment. So that wasn't prohibited by law. But because people don't understand how this law works and what they can and cannot do, it's causing issues like this. Florida put it back on the ballot I think it was for the 2024 presidential election. It was on the ballot. It didn't pass, even though the majority voted that they wanted to get rid of that law. It ended up not passing. It's still on the books because I think they needed 60% to vote yes or no or whatever it was, and only 56 voted, so it didn't pass, and we still have that law. But the danger with that law is that we have not properly educated our healthcare providers on what they can and cannot do. So it's actually very scary, but that's all I'm going to say about that.
But this is a national problem. To that end, my bill would direct the Consumer Product Safety Commission to make nitrous oxide a banned hazardous
Loomer. I'm like
product.
12 years older than her.
This would have the effect of prohibiting its sale for household and recreational use. The bill is carefully drafted to ensure legitimate uses would not be impacted, such as in dentist offices, commercial kitchens, or automotive settings. Banning consumer sales through the CPSC would also ensure sellers cannot merely label a product as for food to get around it. This bill would also not affect the availability of integrated canisters of whipped cream. And baking hobbyists have many other ways to whip cream that are cheaper and just as effective. Behind me are just a few of the people across the country who have died or been seriously injured from nitrous oxide. We're also seeing a growing number of nitrous-related DUIs and people being killed by drivers using it behind the wheel. I want to recognize two families in the audience today, represented by Julia and Michael Charleston and Jerry Gray Benetti. Each has a loved one who has struggled with or has been sadly lost to nitrous oxide. I'm grateful for you being here. Thank you, Julia and Jerry, for your tireless advocacy, channeling the tragedy that you have faced and organized hundreds of parents pushing to get nitrous off our shelves. I'm honored to partner with you on this work. In advance of this hearing, I've received more than a dozen letters from parents and other loved ones impacted by nitrous oxide misuse. I am submitting those for the record. One of my constituents in Hillsborough, California, writes about her daughter who struggles with nitrous. Quote, "There is no reason for anyone over the age of 21 to legally paralyze themselves with this substance because they suffer from the disease of addiction and their drug of choice is legally available. We love our daughter deeply and are begging for reasonable assistance in getting this stuff off our streets." A parent in Florida writes, quote, Every day that nitrous oxide remains so easily accessible is another day that another family's son or daughter may begin a life-threatening addiction with consequences they never imagined. A mom from Oklahoma shares, "Nitrous oxide destroyed my life. Please keep Americans safe and never make another mother bury their only child." I want to be clear that I do not take bans of any kind lightly. We should be sure a product's benefit to society is outweighed by its harms. In my view, this bill is the right approach because of how dangerous nitrous oxide is, regardless of the age of the user, the number of times they use it, or the size of the canister. I urge this committee to advance the Nitrous Oxide Safety Act in the coming months. It is bipartisan. Lives are on the line. Thank you, and I yield back.
All right, I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Bentz for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, panel, for being here. As an attorney back in Oregon for many, many years, I had occasion to work with folks in various debt settlement arrangements. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was their surprise when they learned that they were going to have to pay taxes on that which was forgiven. And I'm just curious if this is an issue that should be addressed in the bill we've been looking at to address these debt settlement challenges. Should the tax exposure be something that's discussed? And I think the proper person to ask is Ms. Winslow this question. So what's your thought?
Yes, absolutely. The citizens in Oregon are not alone there. There's often surprise at the end when consumers realize that they owe additional money that they didn't know was coming, and that should absolutely be part of the disclosures that consumers have up front.
Yeah, I glanced through the bill and it didn't jump out at me, but it seemed to me that that would be something you absolutely would have to disclose at the front end. Otherwise, it's easily ignored, and then suddenly, if you draw an audit in that unlikely event, but even at some point it could become a problem. I want to shift to strict liability and tort. And we had a number of opportunities back in my law practice to bring cases in that context. And it's a device, of course, that's available when you are damaged by harm from some dangerous product. And it's there because there isn't necessarily going to be recourse in any other fashion. And it's there because there are dangerous products that make their way through this system that we put in place to try to catch all of those that aren't. Here was the problem. And when someone would come into my office and say, hey, I remember one case, it was horrid, but a young person had been dealing with one of these masks that you put on, and it has an elastic band around it, and on the end of it, it has a sharp projectile, as it turned into, and when he pulled it on, it popped off and hit him in the eye, and he lost his eye. And so the question was, who made this? Who created this thing that had this dangerous element? And so I'm asking, and I guess I'll turn to Mr. Castro first. Is this something that we should be talking about in this legislation, where we try to make people at least identify where they're from, who they are, the people producing these things, so that in the unfortunate event that there isn't someone checking on these dangerous things, there might be recourse through strict liability. I mean, and again, I can think of all kinds of weaknesses and frailties in what I'm suggesting, but please comment.
You're absolutely right. The question of liability is really important here, especially when you start talking about the online marketplaces, because the seller is different than the marketplace. So the seller is the one that might have the liability. But if you're talking about an overseas seller, you might have really no ability to have recourse. So I think that transparency is important so consumers can make good decisions. But one thing that we are seeing that's really important here is that buying on certain platforms, for example, Amazon, they've made guarantees so that when you're buying, you don't have to basically care where that seller is, because they're providing the guarantee that there'll be recourse available for you that they're adding on. And so I think that's something that consumers often aren't aware of, and that's one of the differences of American platforms. I'd like to see more platforms move in that direction so no consumers put in a situation where they have a significant harm and absolutely no recourse.
But the point you're making is that those people who choose to use that particular platform do have that extra level of protection in the event that the product is actually dangerous.
That's right.
And so that should be called out in some fashion so that when people are shopping online, which seems like everybody does now, they actually know that this extra level of protection is available. That seems to me to be something we ought to be considering here, because I'm not sure that the consumer is fully aware of that option.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the questions is how much of that should be competition between marketplaces versus mandates or guarantees pushed forth by government. But you're absolutely right. That is a central question right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this most interesting, your presentations. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'll recognize Ms. Clark for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank our ranking member, Schakowsky, for holding this legislative hearing. And thank you to our panel of witnesses for joining us today. Time and again in this Congress, I've sat at this dais and sent out an alarm to my colleagues of the dangerous, systematic destruction of the FTC and its independence from the White House. For over 100 years, the FTC has been the cop on the beat against fraud, scams, and deception because Congress gave it the trust and authority to enforce appropriately. In only a year and a half, Trump and his conservative Supreme Court have unjustly fired the Democratic commissioners of the FTC and ended 90 years of precedent, allowing the president to fire FTC commissioners at will, directly gutting the guardrails that Congress has placed on the agency to ensure independent, bipartisan work. This administration is bad for consumers and bad for business. Without a bipartisan FTC, consumers will lose their unbiased advocate to obtain recourse when they've been.
I don't think it's an unbiased advocate. I think that the FTC is very biased by their lobbyists.
Taken advantage of by scammers. While they're all not perfect, many of the bills that are part of this hearing today seek to solve real issues impacting Americans. Though without the intended independence, trust, and authority maintained by the FTC, how can any of these bills properly seek protection and recourse? So, Mr. Brayott, with the recent SCOTUS ruling in Trump v. Slaughter, how do you recommend Congress effectively legislate when the independent agencies we once trusted to enforce laws are no longer independent?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I couldn't agree with you more that bills like the ones that are up for consideration today, as well as many of the bills that are already on the books that protect millions of consumers, are only as effective as their enforcement. And the role that the FTC plays in protecting consumers from unfair and deceptive practices has never been more necessary than it is today. Absent a bipartisan FTC, one where both parties are represented, one where the commissioners don't have to constantly worry that they're going to be fired if they go after the wrong company, those laws are only not worth the paper that they're written on. And so I think that Congress can and should pass legislation that reverses Trump v. Slaughter. You can also use your other levers that you have available to you through the appropriations process, through oversight, for example, to make sure that these agencies, the FTC, the CPSC, and other independent agencies continue to do the critically important work that they must do to protect America's consumers and competition.
Very well, thank you. And going forward, how can Congress best hold the FTC and the CPSC accountable to ensure that they are acting in the best interest of all Americans?
Well, Congress's oversight function has never been more important than it is now, particularly in an environment where we do have agencies that are not acting, or at least not led by bipartisan commissioners. Your role is more important than ever. And I think also there is a role to be played by the states So avoiding passing legislation that prevents the states from playing the important consumer protection role that they have always played and that's more important than ever is also one way that Congress can help protect consumers and small businesses.
Very well. It couldn't be simpler. The FTC has been an effective and trustworthy commission that Congress has repeatedly expressed confidence in and trusted with expanded authority. What the Trump administration is doing is shameful, and my Republican colleagues are enabling and supporting a more dangerous marketplace and online experience for all Americans. And I'll remind you all one more time, this is all out of the Project 2025 playbook. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. And I recognize Ms. Houchin for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis and Ranking Member Schakowsky, for holding this hearing today. I want to thank the witnesses also for offering your testimony. I'm pleased to see that H.R. 5967, the Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention, which I'm proud to co-lead, is included in the hearing today. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Menendez, for his partnership on this bipartisan bill. Fraud in this country is no longer a nuisance crime. The FTC estimates that once underreporting is accounted for, Americans have lost roughly $196 billion to fraud in 2024 alone. And the problem is not that nobody is working on this at the federal level. The problem is that everyone is working on a different piece of it. There's no single agency that is seeing the whole picture. Our bill directs the FTC, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, to convene an interagency task force to develop a national strategy to address these scams, one that puts consumer complaint databases to work, invests in public education, coordinates with industry, sharpens enforcement, and works with our international partners. It's very frustrating when we have constituents that call and say, well, I've put my name in the database, and it seems to go not much further than that. Mr. Castro, you write that effective prevention depends on identifying patterns across complaints, across marketplaces and payment systems, and other sources of information that no single agency sees on its own. And you recommend the task force prioritize exactly that kind of data collection and information sharing. So I want to start with you. Is there any entity in the federal government today whose job it is to assemble that composite picture?
There's not. You're exactly right. It's just pockets of activity, but no cohesive work.
And that may be why constituents feel like they've just, shouted into the void when they're suffering from these as victims of fraud.
Exactly.
So what is actually stopping it? Is it authority? Is it statutory restrictions on sharing? Is it willingness? Is it capability? What's preventing us right now from having that kind of data collection and information sharing?
There's no real ownership right now over who's going to be responsible for that and why they can and should be collaborating. There's also no direction that they should be working, I think, with the private sector to share that information so that information collected about one activity that's illegal and harmful is shared with another branch of government, because often these are organized criminal networks.
And states' attorneys generals they're trying to do their part to tackle some of this fraud on a state-by-state basis, but at the same time, that information sharing would be important too, correct?
That's right.
You recommend explicitly including online counterfeiting and piracy within the task force scope, adding online retailers and marketplaces to the industries that should be consulted. Can you say more about why those platforms in particular should have a seat at the table?
They often have insight into, obviously, what consumers are seeing. They're the first ones to hear a complaint about a product they might receive before the CPSC, so they actually have that intelligence to say, wait a second, I'm getting complaints about this product. It's because it's a fraudulent product. So they have information no one else has. And then we talk about online piracy, for example. Online piracy, consumers are going to all sorts of sites that are not legitimate, and that's where malware is being distributed. That's where other types of scam ads are being distributed. So they also, the legitimate streamers are seeing where some of their consumers are going, and they have insights as well.
And we're seeing it repeatedly, I see it on my own feed, lots of scam ads where it's advertising a product mostly from China that you cannot buy. and it's intended to steal your data, maybe your financial information. And the retailers are the first people potentially to see some of these scams. There are other online platforms that I think we may want to include in the task force as a way to crack down on some of these scam ads that we might see on non-retailer sites. Do you agree?
I agree. To give a very specific example, when we bought some of these counterfeits, what was interesting is in the package came advertising to say, when you want to buy something else, go to this other site. So they were actually directing you to who knows where. And,
a scam and a scam.
Further scams, exactly.
Well, thank you for your leadership. Americans are losing nearly $200 billion a year to criminals who seem better coordinated than the government. I think we can do better. We can fix that with H.R. 5967, as I hope this will move through the committee process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady.
So, I've been streaming almost 5 to 6 times a week these hearings since like the second week of June. And I have to say, I hear the word fraud and scam come up so much in these hearings. I feel like 80 to 90% of these hearings are just about fraud and scams. And it just makes me wonder, like, what are our government agencies doing? What are they doing? Why do we have so much fraud? Why do we have so many scams? Why is this an issue that it just keeps getting worse and worse? So I was just curious. I just did like a quick, search. Like, what is the role of the FTC? So the FTC, it stands for Federal Trade Commission. It's an independent federal agency whose core mission is to protect consumers and promote competition in the U.S. economy. So I read that as, they're supposed to make sure that things are safe for the American public and prevent monopolies, right? So Congress created the FTC in 1914 through the Federal Trade Commission Act. Its major responsibilities are stopping unfair or deceptive business practices, including fraud, scams, and misleading advertising, and enforcing federal antitrust laws designed to prevent anti-competitive product. So I will say, what I do see the FTC doing, the FDA as well, is they really get going about the misleading advertising, right? So I would say that we see this the most amongst like the wellness, fitness, supplement space. The FTC and the FDA, they want to make sure that, if you're not a Rockefeller prescription, you're not making claims that, your natural product could actually help you. They're very big on making sure that if you're a supplement company or a peptide company or a wellness company, and you're not, a part of that Rockefeller petroleum-based prescription, I don't even know what you want to call it, but if you're not a part of that, you're not really medicine. You can't make a claim. If you're not FDA approved, you can't make a claim. And they go really hard onto some of these companies, making sure that, they don't make false claims. But the thing is, a lot of these companies are run by like good American business owners that just think that there could be an alternative to prescriptions and Western medicine. Even like Eastern medicine, we treat as, like a supplement. It's not FDA approved, like, traditional Chinese medicine, for example. Something that they've done thousands of years, okay? And acupuncture and traditional Chinese herbs still used in the West, or East rather. They're still used in the East every day, okay? But we call that like alternative medicine here in the U.S. Chiropractic, that's alternative medicine. And I see that the FDA and the FTC, they're really doing a good job like policing alternative medicine. They don't want anybody that's associated with Eastern or alternative medicine to make any claims that could disparage the pharmaceutical companies or could disparage, Western Rockefeller medicine. I remember growing up, I had like really bad acne in like my late teens and 20s, and I went to my dermatologist, and I just asked him, because he put me on all this medication, all these creams. I had to go on like an antibiotic that I was taking daily for months. And I asked him, I'm like, do you think what I'm eating, like my diet, is causing this? You know, I went to college and I don't have my mom's cooking and I'm eating this, and this. Do you think that that is causing all this acne on my face? He literally looked at me and said, no, diet has nothing to do with your skin. Okay? Now, years later, I went to trade school and I got my esthetician's license. And I worked for a few different like medical skincare companies. And one of the companies I worked with, they taught us that, yes, indeed, what you eat shows up on your face. And they trained us where, in practice, I could look at somebody's face and I could literally tell them what they eat every day. Like, oh, I see a pimple here, here, and here. I bet you eat a lot of fruit. Yeah, that was right. Or I bet you eat a lot of salt. I bet you eat a lot of sugar. And I could tell by looking at somebody's face what they were eating, because indeed, what you eat affects your skin. But that's not what my dermatologist was taught in medical school, and he looked me in the eye and said no. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. But the bottom line is, I just don't think our FTC is doing a great job. Let's see what else they do. So they're supposed to investigate companies and individuals suspected of violating consumer protection or competition laws, brings enforcement actions, seeks court orders and monetary remedies where authorized creates certain consumer protection rules. So basically, if a small business is doing well and Big Pharma thinks that they're competing, the FTC is going to go after them and litigate them until they have no money and go bankrupt, because God forbid you try to help somebody in America with diet, exercise, or a supplement, okay? So that's, I think the FTC is doing a great job getting rid of small businesses that actually want people to be healthy. So essentially, the FTC is a federal government. It's their primary consumer protection agency, and its job is to protect Americans from fraud, deception, and unfair business practices, while also protecting competition in the marketplace. I could say a few more things about the FTC, but I'm not right now. Let's continue with the stream.
Now recognize Ms. Stingle for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to the witnesses. Consumer protection is about trust. Families should not have to worry that the products that they buy are unsafe, that their personal information will be exploited, or that sophisticated scammers are waiting to steal their hard-earned savings. These aren't partisan issues. These are issues that are affecting every American, regardless of where they live or how they vote. And as scams become more sophisticated, Congress has a responsibility to ensure our laws keep pace. But strong laws alone aren't enough. They got to be enforced. And that's why I remain concerned by this administration's efforts to weaken the agencies charged with protecting consumers. At a time when Americans are facing higher costs and increasingly complex fraud schemes, we need to be strengthening, not weakening, the institutions that are there to keep people safe. But I want to focus on Congressman Menendez and Congressman Hoshin's bipartisan strategic task force on Scam Prevention Act, the Scam Prevention Act, which I'm very proud to support, and I appreciate their leadership on this important effort. Scams have evolved dramatically in recent years. Criminals are using artificial intelligence, fake websites, spoof phone numbers, text messages, and social media to target Americans every day. In 2025, Americans reported a $15.9 billion in fraud losses, and we know many more victims never reported what happened. Investment scams caused the greatest financial losses, followed by imposter scams, while nearly 30% of reported scams originated on social media. Older Americans continue to bear the greatest financial harm. I have literally met with a woman who was convinced she was going to marry somebody from downtown Abbey and had given her entire savings to this man. And I probably shouldn't say this.
Okay, guys. But can we also, acknowledge that you as the consumer, you as the person, like, need to take accountability and try to prevent getting scammed. Like, this isn't a new scam. Like, there are a lot of these scams where they target, you know, older women, and they believe that they're, like, secretly dating a celebrity, okay? And then they get, like, a whole sob story, and they are sending them, you know, all of their money. But can we please, like, acknowledge that, like, you need to do something and not be, like, a complete idiot? Come on. That should not be the FTC's job. Like, if you're that gullible that you, like, truly believe that, you know, some celebrity that will not send you a picture, not talk to you on the phone or anything, won't FaceTime you, that just found you on Instagram and you're like a 65-year-old single cat woman, and then he starts asking you for money, that maybe that's not real, okay? Like, can we take some accountability? I think, like, well, I don't know if this is true or not, but, like, I have a relative, and she, like, had, like, a scam she luckily prevented a couple months ago. But, like, the scammers were, like, yelling at her and threatening her, okay? Like, that should be a dead giveaway. Like, the IRS isn't going to call you and yell at you and demand that you give them, like, your bank account number, okay? Like, can we just acknowledge that maybe us as citizens, maybe we need to do a better job, like, telling our elderly not to talk to somebody they don't know, not to give out their banking information. Come on, we can do better.
But I'm going to, my own mother, somebody called her, and she actually, this is the most recent one, they're gaining access to seniors' computers and then getting into their financial accounts and changing passwords. Thank God my mother's financial advisor called me, and I figured out that they had done that. But we've got to figure out how we educate people better. And that's why we need a coordinated national strategy that brings together government, law enforcement, financial institutions, and the private sector to stop scams before they happen. Mr. Braille, from your perspective, what are the biggest gaps in coordination today, and how would a task force improve collaboration to better protect consumers from scams?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. With regards to this act, it addresses a structural deficiency that we have in addressing fraud in this country. The scammers don't care about silos and which agency is responsible for the financials or the social media platform or the text message they sent you. They just want to take your money and as much of it as they can. So what we need is a response to prevent, in terms of prevention, that also cuts across all of those silos. We know that many different actors in the industry and many different actors in law enforcement and government receive signals that fraud is happening. But if they're not exchanging information, they don't know how to hold these bad actors accountable and ultimately bring them to justice. That's why bills like this one are so important. They seek to break down those silos, create a single place where this information can be shared, and hopefully that will lead to stronger enforcement, better safeguards by these industries that depend on customers' business, and hopefully fewer constituents like your mother and others who are victims of fraud every year.
Thank you. Scammers continue to evolve faster than our response, which is another problem. They've moved from robocalls to text messages, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, making these scams more convincing and more difficult to detect. Mr. Braille, how can Congress ensure our consumer protection efforts keep pace with these emerging technologies and increasing sophisticated fraud schemes?
Well, I wish there was a single action you can take, but there are so many, I don't have time to list them all. Certainly making sure that our consumer protection agencies are fully staffed and have the authority that they need to go after these bad actors is step one. Passing bills like the Scam Prevention Act is another way to do it. We also believe there's a role for Congress to play in creating incentives for the various companies that consumers depend on and that scammers misuse, the banks, the social media companies, the telecom companies, to better reinforce their networks and protect consumers from these scams in this first place. And finally, we know that even with all of these efforts done, if we could wave a magic wand today and have them all in place, consumers would still be victims of fraud because, as you mentioned, the scammers are moving so much more quickly. And that's why we need to have a robust way for consumers to be made whole after these scams occur.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I am going to ask some more questions on the record. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. All right, now I recognize Mr. Kane for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our distinguished witnesses for being here today. In my home state of New Jersey, I've heard from constituents who have spoken firsthand about the dangers of a product found at gas stations and convenience stores across the country, nitrous oxide canisters. This product, also known as laughing gas, can also be used as a culinary propellant for products like whipped cream. In recent days, however, there's been an epidemic of misuse of nitrous oxide as an inhalant that gives users a high. Its abuse can lead to heart attacks, nerve damage, muscle spasms, numbness, birth defects, paralysis, and even death. Nitrous oxide canisters full of this dangerous and deadly substance are being sold without restriction to youth and adults who have no knowledge of the dangers associated with the substance that they are inhaling. And that's why today I am sending letters to gas stations, convenience stores, and online retailers across the country who have sold nitrous oxide to unsuspecting consumers. Mr. Brio, the inhalation of nitrous oxide represents a real danger to the American public. Would you agree that the sale of nitrous oxide canisters at gas stations presents a scenario where most consumers are not legitimate culinary businesses?
Well, it's clear that the sale of nitrous oxide for recreational use is dangerous to consumers. It's not made it should not never be used for recreational purchases, and we would support efforts to get it off the market for those uses.
And I share your concern, and I look forward to hearing from these gas stations on measures that they plan to take to ensure that nitrous oxide is not sold for illegitimate purposes. What steps would you believe that Congress should consider to address the abuse of nitrous oxide by American consumers?
Well, Congressman, we've been very happy to work with Congressman Mullen's team on this nitrous oxide bill that's being considered today. We do believe that this is a dangerous product that should not be on the market for recreational use, and we're happy to see that some of the legitimate uses for it continue to be protected. And we look forward to working with him and with you to make sure that no more families have to experience the heartbreak that so many who are here in the room today have experienced because of the misuse of this product.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Castro, I am pleased that my bill, the Defending Against Foreign Propaganda Act, under consideration at today's legislative hearing. China and Russia have long sought to wield influence on American opinion, seeking to influence America's policymakers through a variety of media formats. How does foreign propaganda threaten to unduly influence Americans without awareness of the entities that are influencing them?
It's a great question. Thank you for it. I think right now you have, of course, advertisements across all sorts of different platforms, and consumers benefit when they know who it is that's actually speaking to them. Transparency in this information is critical so that they can be informed consumers and understand what information they're receiving and whether or not it's trustworthy.
As a follow-up, this bill also makes clear that foreign governments who pay for ads in America must disclose their affiliate government. Do you believe that robust disclosure requirements for foreign government-funded ads would increase public awareness of malign foreign influence efforts?
I think it's a great step forward. I think we want to look comprehensively at all the different ways that foreign influence can seep in here, because what we're seeing in advertising and in commercial settings, for example, is that sometimes it'll be a step removed. So they might hire an influencer who does some kind of information. So it's not a
Oh my gosh, God forbid an influencer supports a product. That must be false. But let's forget about the fact that we're one of 2 countries in the world that allows our pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV. And if you watch TV and don't have a subscription that censors your commercials, literally every other commercial is a pharmaceutical drug. Okay? Like, there's a problem with this. And I don't know a lot about the FTC, but I feel like it's similar to the FDA, where it's just shilling for big companies and big pharma. But anyways, it's very late here. I do want to go watch House of the Dragon tonight. But thanks for joining me. We'll finish up this hearing tomorrow, and there's a lot of other good hearings from the Senate and Congress from the last week of July and last week that we got to get to this week. So thank you guys for joining me. Again, that hearing that I was talking about before with generics, it's called poison pills. Go to senate.gov. You can see it for yourself. I wasn't making that up. They've done multiple hearings about our generics. Look for yourself. Everybody knows. All right. Have a great
paid ad